Welcome back to Out with the New, In with the Old. Today I'm starting my series of used car shopping, and I'm starting with the 60s, which is probably more of a reach than I'd say 80% of you people out there are interested in. But we're going to go over it. I think this is more directed at people that are just car people that like old stuff. We'll move on up through the decades, but today is the 60s. I've owned several cars from the 60s. A lot of them I had back in the day. I started driving in 1979, and cars from the 60s were dirt cheap for me. I had a 69 Cadillac. I had a 62 Cadillac. I had a 63 Pontiac Grand Prix. I had two 68 Pontiac Grand Prix. I've had a 68 GTO. I had a 68 Oldsmobile Cutlass. I had a 69 Chevelle Malibu, which was probably one of the most interesting cars I ever had. I'll just do a short. I was going down a street in a neighborhood, actually a neighborhood, a couple of neighborhoods away from where I grew up, and I saw this white four-door, which I didn't care about four-door cars back then, but I saw it, and it was for sale, and it was awfully clean, 69 Malibu, and I said, well, maybe it's cheap. And I pull up to it, and it's got $850 on the for sale sign, which back then that wasn't necessarily cheap, but it wasn't a lot. The car was in real nice shape, no rust. And I looked through the window, and there's a four-speed. I'm like, wow, a four-door with a four-speed. And it had a 307 emblem on the front, which was probably my least favorite Chevy small block at the time. That's what it had. They were basically what I always considered truck engines. Anyway, I'm still peeking at it and looking through, and I see the brake pedal says power disc brakes. I'm like, power disc brakes and a four-speed on a 307 four-door Malibu. Very odd. White with blue interior. I knock on the door. The guy comes out. He's, I don't know, I'm estimating 35 to 40 years old, living with his parents still. He's a school teacher. I'm kind of a different guy, but oh yeah, I bought the car new. I'm getting a new car, whatever. And I drove it, and I made him an offer and bought it from him. I mean, just because it was so odd, it was cool. But anyway, I've never seen another Chevelle Malibu equipped like that in my entire life. Nowadays, it would probably be worth something just because of its extreme rarity, although the 307 kind of detracted from the coolness of it. It was kind of like equipped like a European sports car, except that it had that 307. I mean, if it had even a 350 or a 327, something a little more of a hotter car engine, but it actually, it was a fun car to drive. It had manual steering too. He did not get power steering on it. So it was an oddball. Anyway, get off track. I just had to bring that car up though, because if anybody's ever seen one, I'd like to know about it. That had to be an extremely rare car. And at the time I spotted it, it was probably an 11-year-old car, I think around 1980. All the other cars I had, the 68 GTO was neat. Not extremely rare. It did have the high output engine, which was approximately 10% of production, which in 68, production was pretty high. I think it ended up, I'm looking it up, there was like 7,700 made with an HO, and this one was a four-speed. It also had no power steering or brakes. So it was a fun car. I actually got it wrecked, and my father did the body work on it and went through the whole car. It didn't have that many miles on it. Let's see, what else did I have from the 60s? The Grand Prix, I always loved the Grand Prix. They were just big, sporty cars, had the bigger, more powerful engines in them. Great cars. The one thing I'll say in common with all these cars is they were durable. I was watching a YouTuber talking about how, 3 years old, cars from this era, less than 100,000 miles, they were wore out. And that is so untrue. It's ridiculous. In our neighborhood, it was a working class neighborhood. There was a guy that worked at General Motors that had of all things, he had a 68 Chrysler Newport. And it had a 383 in it. And that's what he used. And granted, every time I saw him, he was probably idling down the road. But he had the last check before he finally sold it was 400,000 miles on that 68 Newport. A guy I worked for had a 58 Cadillac with 375,000 miles on it when it finally, the glass fuel filter broke on the hot end and the car burnt up. And it was heartbreaking because I remember that car as a little kid, and I grew up and the car was always there. I took care of his swimming pool, his yard, and his house. He was a railroad guy, and I started off as a little kid just doing odds and ends for him. And I kind of, even through all my jobs, kept taking care of all his stuff, shoveling his driveway just because we became friends. But when the 58 Caddy burned up, it was I almost cried. There was other cars in the neighborhood that had lots of miles. And most of the people I knew kept their cars at least 10 years. People didn't buy new cars every 2 years in that neighborhood. They kept their cars 10 years, and a lot of them didn't buy brand new cars. They'd buy a lower mile or 2 or 3 year old car and keep it 10 years. My dad bought a new car for my mother every 10 years. And I don't even know if it would have been 10 years if it wasn't for my brother intervening on one of them and finishing one off. But the cars were durable. We had the Dodge Coronet with 183,000 when it got wrecked, and it was still a good running car. So there was reasons some of those cars didn't last as long, and one of the reasons is they didn't have overdrive like modern cars, so the engine spun a little higher going down the highway. I think people gave up on them when a timing chain went, which on those cars was no big deal because none of those engines were interference engines. You put in a timing chain and timing gear set, and it was good to go. And the problem there was, I got it on my list here, nylon timing gears. A lot of cars had nylon cam gears, and the gear would just eventually crumble up. I mean, a lot of them, Pontiacs, I had lots of Pontiacs, and it was almost common for a Pontiac between 80 and 100,000 miles to lose that gear. And it didn't matter. You put the timing gears on and the chain, and you got metal gears to replace it with, and the engine, no damage to the engine whatsoever. They were not interference engines, so it wasn't that big a deal. Not to mention those cars are much easier to work on. But anyway, let's go over the cons and the pros of 60s cars. Okay, cons. They don't have hardened valve seats, which you got to be careful with today's gas because if you get any pinging or knocking, it'll eat away at the valve seats, and you'll have to get a valve job sooner than you normally would. They weren't. That was back when gas had lead in it, kept the valve seats lubricated, and there hasn't been lead in gas since the 70s. They've phased it out, and you can put an additive in to help that. And if you ever do a valve job, you can get hardened valve seats put in. But it's not that big a deal if you're aware of it. Nylon timing gears, I just brought up that, and that was seemed really common in General Motors cars. Not a big deal. No overdrive. I brought that up. Drum brakes. Drum brakes were definitely subpar. If you got them real wet, they didn't stop. If you made a high-speed stop from 70 or faster, you probably weren't going to stop again really soon, because the brakes, when they got hot, they faded pretty bad. But that's something to be aware of. You can swap out to put discs in front, but I mean, I drove drum brake cars for years and years, and it's just something you're aware of. And you know, I mean, a lot of big trucks still have all drum brakes. It's not that bad. They stop very well. They just have some limitations. Most of your cars from the 60s had pretty soft handling, and combined with the bias ply tires they came with, made them a little bit, you know, a handful, especially in the rain. But you put a modern set of tires on them and keep the suspension in good shape, and you're way ahead. I mean, they're not dangerous. They're just different than what we're used to. You get used to it. You pay attention to it. They ride nice. And some of your more high-performance vehicles, like the GTO, had a stiffer suspension. Some cars came, you know, it was an option to get a heavy-duty suspension, and it's nice if you can find one that way. But for what we're looking at in our price range, we're probably not going to see that. I put vacuum wipers down. They kind of got phased out really in the early 60s. My 62 Cadillac had vacuum wipers. And they're a little, that was one thing I never did like about that car. And I drove that car back and forth, Norfolk, Virginia to Plainfield, New Jersey, back and forth on leave, weekends, and I never did anything to that car other than change the oil and keep it greased, you know, all the grease fittings done. And but I'll tell you, if you're in the rain and you want to pass somebody and you nail it to pass somebody, well, they're vacuum operated. So when you nail it, your vacuum drops and the wipers almost stop at the same time you're passing somebody. It wasn't a good idea, but a lot of cars back then had it. They got phased out in the very early 60s. And last but not least, these cars are old. So you're going to run into problems just of age. Rubber parts, all that kind of stuff. Of course, there wasn't as much plastic on those cars as you see nowadays. So it may not be as much of an issue. I'd say weather stripping and that kind of thing, you know, on a lot of them is going to be deteriorated, but more age-related problems than anything else. Pros are, and it's a pro to me, is a point ignition. And the reason it's a pro is you can fix it yourself on the side of the road. Is it as spot on as electronic ignition? No, it isn't. A lot of people convert it. And there's nothing wrong with converting to electronic ignition. The slight con to a point ignition is plugs tend to wear faster, so you got to tune the car up more often. Another pro, I think, is a mechanical fuel pump, because they're all carbureted, or at least most of them were carbureted. And again, you break down the side of the road, you can change that fuel pump. It's 2 bolts, slide it in, slide it out, disconnect the fuel line, put it. I've done it. I did it back in the day. Piece of cake, and mechanical fuel pumps are cheap. Tough transmissions. I think that was the era of transmissions that literally didn't wear out. I was a teenager driving a lot of these cars. Hence, power braking, just being as abusive as a person can be to them. And I never ruined a transmission in any of these cars. They were just Turbo 400s, Chrysler 727s, Ford C6s. All 3 of those transmissions are literally, well, it's the same thing they put in their trucks, and they put them in the cars. Just bulletproof transmissions. Carbs, I like carbs. You can tune them yourself. You can jet them yourself. You can do everything yourself to them. A lot of people might disagree with that, especially people that don't work on their own stuff. And a con with a carb is when it's choking to warm the car up, it's using extra gas. It gets in the oil slightly, especially if you let it sit there and idle on high idle, or it. So you really kind of need to do oil changes a little sooner than you would on a car that has the fuel metered perfectly all the time. So it's another one of those plus minus deals, but it's not a big deal. And then the last pro, they're simple. Even if you're not a mechanic and don't know anything about cars, these are good cars to learn with. You can really learn. And cars of the 60s tend to be fairly efficient. Early 60s cars they're good, but I think it's the sweet spot is actually like 63, 4, 5, 6. That era right there, those 4 years, the quality was as good as any car in the world. They were just all of them were well-built cars. They didn't start going down the drain until the later part of the 60s, and it wasn't fast. And you didn't see a degrading quality that was noticeable really until the 70s hit. But I mean, a lot of your mid-60s cars, even the regular cheaper cars like Pontiacs, they had real wood in the interior. They were just well built. You close the door, they clunk. They were really well built cars. So now the thing is there isn't that many out there for anybody to buy, especially under $10,000. I did a quick search this morning, and I found 3. One was a 1960 Falcon with an inline 6, a running driving car that looked to be in nice shape. They said the interior needed work, but it was a running driving car that could be used. Just the interior was a little ratty. I think they wanted $5,000 for it. No rust. Had the 200 inline 6, so it wouldn't probably be the ultimate car on the interstate. It would probably work a little hard, but as a city car, it'd be great. Durable, tough drivetrain. Those cars, you can't really hurt them as long as you're taking care of them. There was a Fairlane, a 66 Fairlane that a guy, I think he wanted $3,000 for it. It also had a 6. Sixes were good durable engines, but when you get on the interstate, and then they typically had lower gearing. They weren't the best on high speed interstates. But then there was the one I would go look at. It was a 66 Mercury Montclair 4-door hardtop. And it looked to be in really nice shape. $79.99. He wants $8,000 for it. 390 2-barrel. Great engine. 390s were around forever. One of Ford's better engines. Durable, tough. And don't let the 2-barrel fool you. Those engines had loads of torque. They moved those big cars just right. And the Mercury was a well-equipped car, power steering, power brakes. That would be a neat car, and it would be a car you could drive. If you notice, the thing on all this was all of these cars were, well, no, the Fairlane was a 2-door. The Falcon and the Mercury were 4 doors. And typically, you're going to see 4-door cars because the 2 doors are getting more collectible. But they're still, if you just want a 1960s car and the cool factor of a 60s car, and you can use them every day. There's no reason you can't. That Mercury really caught my eye. That way, if I was shopping for that right now, I would go look at it because it looked like it'd be a neat car and a good looking car too. Anyway, of all my 60s cars, I could say, yeah, the GTO is one of the favorites, but with the manual steering, manual brake. It was kind of a single purpose car, where the Cadillacs and the Grand Prix, they were, especially the Grand Prix, with the bucket seats, they were sporty inside, well equipped. One of them had power everything in it, which was even unusual in the 60s. Window seats, antenna. It was a fully loaded Grand Prix, and it had a powerful engine. It was just a neat car. And of course, I'm a Cadillac lover from that era, so to me, those cars are great. And all those cars I used to go to work. And then when I joined the Navy, I used a 62 Cadillac for a couple of years, back and forth. My brother finally talked me out of it, and I sold it to him. But I never did anything huge to any of them, and they were used all the time. They're durable, well-made cars. One of the Grand Prix, I had well over 130,000 miles on it when I sold it, and it still was running great, driving great, everything worked. There's nothing wrong with cars of the 60s. They do require maintenance, and I would say, if the carbureted part of it, you probably want to change your oil every 2,500 to 3,000 miles, just because that oil gets contaminated quicker in a carbureted engine. But anyway, we're going to move on to the 70s tomorrow, and that'll get a higher percentage of viewers. I know this was, reaching a little bit, because, 60-year-old cars, but I had to start there. I had to start somewhere, and I just thought there's still some 60s cars that deserve everyday use. I may find myself in one. I'm always looking. Anyway, if you like the content, subscribe, like, and all that kind of good stuff. Thanks for watching.